that I got already. And also, of course, this emphasis on education.
Education, yeah. As reflected, there was unanimity on some issues, and that caused division among the Baptist churches and the Baptist communities. And that's a story that is told again and again throughout the history of who we are as Baptists, and in a way that reflects this whole sense of communities gathering around and together and being led in ways that might eventually lead to how issues are addressed that are confronted from time to time within society, or indeed within the community itself, that cause splits to happen. And but this is nothing new. I mean, the early church confronted this time and again. There were divisions within the first communities formed, as we know through the letters of Paul. And so in that sense, I guess being Baptist is being true to our origins. But no, it's the early stance that was taken is on issues of human rights, really, that stem from an understanding that all peoples are children of God. All people are created by God, and each person is gifted by God in certain ways, and that we need to honor the uniqueness of each individual life. And so it's no surprise that Baptists early on took this position. But I think we recognize this on the mission field. And I'd like to tell the story of Samuel Day, who is actually the first American Baptist missionary to the Telugu people. And he arrived actually in Tamil in what is now Chennai in 1836, 37. And he began to preach the gospel. But the preaching of the gospel led to this was not connecting within the cultural context that he was constantly encountering. And it wasn't until he established a school in Nellore and had provided education for the Telugu people, responding to the needs of the people, that doors began to open that allowed him to share the gospel message. So education, and we find that across on the mission field, education is one of the first areas that are the pioneers of the American Baptist Mission movement engaged in, followed closely by healthcare. And churches began to evolve around. Hi, Michael. Welcome. And churches began to evolve around the hospitals and the schools. And so what we see happening within the Rochester context is reflective of what we have seen all over the world. Especially when the German Baptists emigrated to Rochester and held education in such a high degree of importance, and recognizing that there was a need to integrate German immigrants into society, so they needed to learn English, and what better way to learn English than to read the Bible? And so a lot of the educated German Baptists were able to begin to connect with these with the German school, and that was the beginning. But you know, the First Baptist Church was formed in 1812 on the west side of the Genesee, which was the center of Rochesterville. And it was some, 22 years later that there was a decision made that Rochesterville was expanding to the east side of the Genesee, and that there needed to be a presence, and release 70 people to form the Second Baptist Church. And it was on the east side where many of the Germans, the German Baptists, began to settle. Not just Baptists, but Germans generally from different persuasions, religious persuasions, began to settle. So, but there were a core of pretty dynamic people who were a part of the Second Baptist Church. Martin B. Anderson being one, Augustus Strong. You can go down the list of leaders in the Rochester community at that time that were members of Second Baptist Church, and it was in a house of where members of the Second Baptist Church often met. The idea of establishing a university arose, as well as the need for a seminary. And so it was in 1850 that work was begun in earnest to create those two institutions, and they were created side by side. And it was primarily to provide advanced education for a community that had no opportunity to, unless they went out of state or moved elsewhere, to gain that kind of education. So education certainly was at the heart of the mission movement in Rochester, as it has been around the world. And so it, the University of Rochester and the Rochester Theological Seminary were formed on the same day, actually. And Martin B. Anderson became the president of the University of Rochester, and Augustus Strong became the president of the seminary. And the decision was made to keep them separated. At that point, it could have been formed as one institution, having a divinity school as one department, and your secular programs as another department. But they elected not to do that. And so you had that movement happening at the same time that you had the Baptist churches which associated with one another, gathering together too, and supporting both of these initiatives. So the Baptist Association at that time, of which, of course, Second Baptist was one of the members of that association, was a third prong, and very much tied into this movement. So obviously, it was not just education. In fact, even though education was an important element, just as important, if not more important, was the establishing a way of educating people within the Christian tradition, understanding biblical tradition. These were the prongs that were were surfacing all at the same time. And there was a school that was actually started by a Jesuit priest that eventually that was started by a Jesuit priest primarily for German immigrants, and that school provided an opportunity for students from both the University of Rochester as well as from the seminary to do their practicum. They were able to engage from the German department and others that could speak German became very much involved in the school program as part of their outreach. And before long, the Baptists had taken over that school. And so we had a school for young people. We had a school for adults, and we had, the churches that provided, an array of Sunday school opportunities also. So all of this was happening at the same time during the mid to late 1880s. And it really was in that context that the establishment of what was first known as the East Avenue Baptist Church came about. The original thought was that perhaps this chapel that would be part and parcel of the educational programs that were taking place in the community could be one and the same. But the formation was essentially of what was then known as the East Avenue Baptist Church. And they had acquired land on the corner of Anson and East Avenue and had built a chapel there. And I think I'm getting that right. Yes, it was around 1871 that happened. So so now we have the East Avenue Baptist Church that was providing a place of worship for the students at the University of Rochester, as well as the seminary. And it was led by the professors and the faculty at both the Divinity School, Rochester Theological Divinity School, as well as the University of Rochester. So the roots of what eventually has become Emmanuel Baptist Church were founded in that kind of an environment. And so when the East Avenue Baptist Church was formed, the first full-time pastor was a seminarian. Prior to that time, the pulpit had been populated primarily by professors and faculty members. But in 1872, the church called its first full-time pastor, who was a seminarian that just graduated, and that, of course, was Henry Morehouse. Henry Morehouse became one of the dynamic leaders of the American Baptist. Well, at that point in time, it wasn't really known as a denomination, but became one of the leaders of one of the Baptist organizations, which was the American Baptist Home Mission Society. And then eventually became one of the leaders to help form the denomination in 1907, which was the National Baptist Convention. Before 1907, there was no convention, no organization of that type. All of the organizations that existed were singular purpose organizations, such as the Foreign Mission, the Home Mission, the Education Society, the Bible Society, the Historical Society. They were all single purposed organizations. But Henry Morehouse was instrumental in helping to bring all of these organizations together in association with a a national body.
So
that-
is that called the National or the Northern Baptist Convention?
I'm sorry, you're right, Northern Baptist Convention. That's right, Northern Baptist Convention.
And also, Henry Morehouse is the gentleman for whom Morehouse College is named. I'm
That's
so
correct.
proud of that.
That's correct. That's correct. Yeah, and again, Morehouse came out of this um, percolating, boiling hotbed of religious liberty and the sanctity of the right of human choice and the sanctity of life that attracted Walter Rauschenbusch and eventually and others, but very much committed to providing opportunity for education for all peoples. And I think the fact that his name is attached to Morehouse College, which is primarily an Afro-American college, he being white is extremely significant, is extremely significant. But at any rate.
Well, like its sister school, Spelman, that was named through the Rockefeller family, and probably in that case they gave money. I don't know about where the money from Morehouse College came, but Spelman, sure, that came from Rockefeller Baptist money.
Spelman for what?
It was the Spelman family is associated with Rockefeller, like Laura Spelman Rockefeller.
Right.
And so I'm assuming that was money that paid for that quality, prestigious women's college that's associated with Morehouse.
Oh, okay. I got you. Right. Well, yeah. Rockefeller was Baptist, and his family supported a lot of Baptist enterprises, including the construction of the Divinity School on the Hill. That was Rockefeller money that allowed that that land to be acquired and the building constructed. But that's true. So at any rate, the next important event was really I think it was around 1884. And it was when the Baptist churches who had been associating with one another formally organized into the Rochester Baptist Missionary Union. And again, it's a reflection of the importance of mission in the American Baptist life. This Baptist Union, a Missionary Baptist Union, comprised a lot of the churches that came out of First Baptist and Second Baptist. You know, we have Lake Avenue that came out of First Baptist. We have Lyle Avenue that came out of Lake Avenue. We have Parcells Avenue and came out of Second Baptist Church. You know, we can go on down the list of all these churches that sprung up primarily out of First Baptist or Second Baptist Church. But these churches continue, even though they planted new churches, they stayed together connectionally through the society, and they formed this association. And its primary purpose was not only fellowship among these various churches, but also to support mission endeavor both within the U.S. as well as internationally. And the success of this association can be seen by the number of missionaries that were commissioned out of this area, and particularly out of Second Baptist Church. By the turn of the century, more than 40 missionaries have been commissioned out of Second Baptist Church, which just is an amazing number. And I didn't realize this at the time, but in pulling together the information for this, um, there was a missionary, let's see. I can find it. I think it was Frank, yeah, Frank Feeney in 1897, and Jeannie Waite. Now, Jeannie Waite had been serving as a missionary in the Telugu area among the Telugu people in India for about 10 years when Frank Feeney, who was originally commissioned to serve in Burma, they met and got married. And they were married in the Lone Star Church in Nellore, India. And we don't probably have time to go into it, and we're digressing too much, but there's quite a story behind the Lone Star. I think I may have shared that once or twice before with the Emmanuel community, but at some point, that story, if you don't recall it, it needs to be told. But I was at the Lone Star Church in Nellore, and it was the first church established in southern India. And it was established by actually Samuel Day. But at any rate, Mission Enterprise was very much, there was a lot of energy built around that during this period of time. So the Baptist Missionary Union formed with its primary purposes being mission work and Sunday school church education. And then, let's see, in 1911, the name was changed to the Rochester Baptist City Mission Society, and then these name changes reflect the purposes for which the Association of Churches saw themselves engaged with. So we had mission in the late part of the 19th century. Now we have a focus on the city mission in the early part of the 20th century. So it was the City Mission Society. And then at some point it was changed to the Baptist Union of Rochester and Monroe County because churches outside the city were joining in association with the churches in the city. And then as churches from outside Monroe County began to join, it was changed to the Monroe Baptist Association of Rochester and vicinity in 1961. And then when our denomination reorganized, and again, that's because churches from outside our direct vicinity came. Mumford is an example. Nunday is an example. We had a number of churches that did not reside technically within Monroe County that were becoming members of this association. And then when the American Baptists reorganized, the Northern Baptist Convention changed its name in 1950 to the American Baptist denomination, recognizing that it was more than just North, but was much more inclusive than the North. And then in 1972, and Dick and Beth and Wendy, you probably would remember when we were reorganized into the American Baptist Churches of USA. And the reason for that change was recognition that the church was really the focal point of who we were as Baptists. And so the churches were then required to organize in regions. And so that's why at that point, the name of our region was changed to Tacoma, the American Baptist Churches of Monroe Association. And then finally, recognizing that we were more than simply Monroe geographically, in 1889 or 1989, we formed the American Baptist Churches of Rochester, Genesee region. So, which is the name we hold today. However, there has been some discussion underway for the last 3 or 4 years to again change our name because we have expanded beyond Rochester, Genesee region. We have expanded to now 11 states. So the question is, do we change our name again to reflect that new reality of who we are? Or does the name American Baptist Churches of Genesee region have a brand?
That's a good point.
Pardon?
That's a good point.
Yeah.
About having a brand.
Right, because throughout the denomination, when you say you're from the American Baptist Churches of Rochester, Genesee region, that means something. And so it carries an understanding that far surpasses the regional indication of it. So that dialogue has been going on now for 4 or 5 years. Alan Newton started that dialogue 3 or 4 years before he left. But at any rate, again, it's the name. There's meaning to a name, and it states a lot about who we are. And so, but for the time being, we remain the American Baptist Churches of Rochester, Genesee region. Okay, so we have the Park Avenue Baptist Church. After the property on the corner of Anson and East Avenue was sold to Asbury Methodist, we had the Park Avenue, the church formally renamed, although it started earlier, but formally renamed the Park Avenue Baptist Church in 1884, and then continued its ministry until there was a decision to merge with the Baptist Church, the Second Baptist Church again. So the Second Baptist Church spawned the East Avenue Baptist Church, which became the Park Avenue Baptist Church, and then it was decided to come together again as one church. But the commitment was to locate in the southeast area. So when the Second Baptist segment decided to locate downtown and build the Baptist Temple, the people from the Park Avenue Baptist Church were dismissed and allowed to form Emmanuel Baptist Church on the corner of Park Avenue and Brunswick Street. And for the first several years, the Emmanuel Baptist Church met in Elvin Hall at the Divinity School, which was on the corner of Alexander Street and East Avenue, until the church could be built. And the church was started the construction was started in 1926 and completed in 1927. The first pastor of the full-time pastor of Emmanuel was Nelson, and unfortunately, he was right out of seminary, but unfortunately, he was in poor health, and after about 6 months, had to take a leave of absence, and then had to resign in the spring of 1927. And so we had supply pastors from the seminary that continued to kind of, is a repetition of our recent history where, we, not really, because we have within our community gifted and talented preachers who have been able to help sustain the bridge from one permanent full-time pastor to the next pastor, et cetera. But at any rate, the second pastor that was called from Hilton, he was in, I think, Hilton for about 4 years, and Alfred Mercer. And He was with us for 4 years, and the congregation continued to grow. There were originally 107 members of Emmanuel Baptist Church. And then under the leadership of Mercer, it continued to grow. And then when he left, they called Dr. Morrison, Dr. Morrison. And Dr. Morrison, of course, was Mary Fauché's dad, who, Mike, I don't know if Mary was alive when you came to us. Mary Fauché, she may have passed away before you came, but I think everyone else here knew Mary. Just an amazing person. But Mary gave me, shortly before her death, a 1950 bulletin, October 1950 bulletin from Colgate Rochester Crozier Divinity School. And this bulletin is dedicated to the memory of Dr. Morrison. And I'm amazed at who he was that I never knew. And did you know, Dick or Beth or anyone, much of the history of Mary's dad?
Well, my aunt was a church secretary in Providence, Rhode Island, and she worked for Dr. Morrison. He must have gone there after he was here. And
Yes.
She always spoke very highly of him. And of course, he wrote, you want to say the book he wrote?
There are 2 books that became standards. One is called the Minister's Service Manual, which was a gathering of worship services for different events. And the other was called A Masterpiece of Religious Verse. And it was a collection of 2,000 pieces of verse that was collected, I think, mostly by students at Colgate Rochester. They wrote the book, and he published it because that became a standard reference for people to use for poetry and for stories. And I still have it, although some of the information is pretty dated by now. But he put that together as well.
With the help of my aunt, at least one of those books. She worked
She
a lot.
typed the whole thing, I think.
Wow.
Excuse me, what year was Dr. Morrison at Emmanuel, or what years?
I think he was there from he left, I think, in 1931 or 1932. Let me see. I've got it somewhere.
Came in 27. There's 6.5 years, I think.
Yeah, six,
maybe.
right. Well, actually, I don't. No, he resigned in 1932 because Osgood MacDonald came in 32. But at any rate, he was in that time frame, the late 20s, early 30s.
He was before MacDonald.
Yes, he was before Osgood MacDonald. Dr. Morrison was one of the nationally renowned authorities in homiletics, and he wrote many papers on homiletics. His sermons were published in national journals, national magazines. He was just a brilliant person, and he was also quite astute from the financial standpoint, because he became involved on the board of directors of MMBB, and he wrote and actually delivered at the 1933 convention a paper on pensions. Can you believe it? And it was so powerful that the Methodists took it and sent it out to every one of their pastors nationally. But at any rate, so we were very fortunate to have Dr. Morrison here as pastor, but we were just as fortunate that in 1940, he was called to serve on the faculty of Colgate Rochester Divinity School. And he came the same year that my father matriculated at CRDS. And homiletics was a passion of my father's, and he was greatly influenced by Dr. Morrison. And Dr. Morrison then, of course, headed up the homiletics department at Colgate Rochester until his death in 1950. But again,
So my father would have been at,
pardon?
my father would have been in the class 1 year after your father, Paul. He
Yes.
entered Colgate Rochester in 1941, and preaching was very important to my father too. And I would say he was a very good preacher as well. So he must have learned it from Dr. Morrison. I didn't make that connection.
Yeah, yeah. So, well, he certainly has impacted many clergy through his time, both before and during his career at Colgate Rochester. So, but at any rate, Emmanuel was fortunate. And then in 1932, along comes Osgood MacDonald. And it was under Osgood MacDonald was here almost 22 years, from 1932 until the end of 53 or the beginning of 54, when he resigned to take over the homes and hospitals for, I think, the New York State Council of Churches. But during that time, he built that congregation from maybe 150 to 200 up to close to 500. And there wasn't a person that moved into that neighborhood that wasn't visited by Osgood MacDonald within a couple of weeks. That's how Doris Kerber, I think that was how Doris came, because MacDonald visited him. That's how well, at any rate.
Oh, Paul,
Yeah.
was this a time when it was really a neighborhood church?
Yes.
In other words, all the people that lived nearby came?
For the most part, that's right.
Yeah.
And I think it was because of his Osgood MacDonald reaching out to the neighborhood. And but it was primarily a neighborhood church. Although by through the 40s and as we started into the 50s, more and more people had begun to move out to the suburbs. So, and they continue to come in. But my recollections of Osgood MacDonald are obviously the overflowing church. You had to get there early in order to reserve a seat. My grandmother always had a pew in the back of the church, actually where Norman Gladys sits. We used to have a pew there, and that was her pew. And by golly, nobody's going to sit in that pew. And so she would get there about 20 minutes early just to make sure that she had that pew. But the balcony was filled. The sanctuary was filled. The Sunday school program was a large program. And it was, quite frankly, due to a lot of the outreach work by Osgood MacDonald. The other thing I remember are his booming sermons. He would have a tendency to vibrate the rafters at times with his voice.
Oh, really?
It was just amazing. You certainly didn't want to fall asleep, or you couldn't fall asleep, because he would certainly bounce you out of your seat quickly. But he was just an amazing guy. And then he was followed by Bob Slaughter, and Bob maintained that worship-centered church. The church still had its societies. It had outreach programs. It had the White Cross. was big there. There were a lot of programs that were going on, a lot of Bible study programs going on, but it was kind of focused around the community itself. And it was during Bob Slaughter's time that the church went through its renovation, which was a major renovation. The downstairs, there was one part of the downstairs that was finished, the basement, which was the fellowship hall, and the other was not finished. It was still a dirt floor. And so they raised the funds and renovated the whole church to change around where offices were, where classrooms were. The stairwell was where the bathrooms are right now, and the old stairwell was office and nurseries, a nursery area. So that was one of the primary contributions by Bob Slaughter. Then Bob Slaughter went on to, was called to, I think it was Newton Baptist, First Baptist Church of Newton, I believe. And then comes Dick Brown. Dick Brown was called in 1960. His first service, as I recall, was May 1st, 1960. And Dick changed the fabric of the congregation. There was a real transformation that took place during Dick Brown's tenure there. And several people from the seminary became involved. Well, actually, I can't say Dick brought them, although he did bring 2 or 3 were attracted. But I think Jim Ashbrook may have come to the church during Dick Brown's tenure. I don't recall if he was there before Dick or not. But you know, Win Hudson was there, another faculty member. So there were a good number of faculty members that were there, but Dick was very, very much engaged in social outreach. And when the riots occurred in Rochester, Dick, along with some of the primary Baptist leaders that were involved were George Hill from Lake Avenue, as well as Lee Bainan from First Baptist, along with clergy from the Council of Churches. Herb White was the executive director. Marv Chandler was associate director for community outreach. Did you know Marv, Wendy, at all?
Yes.
You knew, right?
Chandler.
Oh, Chandler?
Yeah.
No, not really.
Okay.
His name.
Marv was an amazing guy. Dick and Beth, you knew Marv?
Well, we knew of him. We weren't here at the time.
No, well, I remember he did a wonderful program for GRCC, I guess.
Yeah, years later.
About the history of the race issues here in Rochester, and he was a great musician too.
Oh, Marv was just amazing, and he was another strong influence in my life. And he was, but they were involved in helping to form Fight, which was organized to a point where they could bring in Saul Alinsky and address the employment issues and the lack of hiring by Eastman Kodak Company, which was then the largest employer in Rochester. Over 60,000 people were employed, but not many of them were from the Afro-American community. And so one of the members of our church, Bill Vaughn, was president of Eastman Kodak Company at that time. And Dick Brown was leading the advocacy, walking alongside the leaders of the Fight organization to compel Eastman Kodak Company to change its employment policies. And so Bill Vaughn formed a committee that met with people from the community and the employment policies were changed, and training programs were instituted, and opportunities to you know, gain the necessary skill sets to work in meaningful employment within the Eastman Kodak Company, and also the housing was addressed. Fight Square was created. So you know, a lot of good things happened during this period of time. And Dick was recognized with the Rhodes Award at the American Baptist Convention for his work in helping to establish all of that. Dick left in 1967. And it's interesting. Dick and I had become pretty close, and one of the things Dick said to me was that the church was not at a place where it was ready to fully commit and engage in some of the issues within the community. And really the community, the congregation was at that point almost divided. There were those that were community activists and those who were represented more of the establishment, more of the business community. You know, we had the president of Gleason Works. We had the senior vice president of Xerox. We had a lot of the business leaders who were members of the community at that time. But we had others that you know, felt strongly that the church should be much more engaged in community effort. So Dick left, and there came for a year. Osgood McDonald, was it at that time? No, that was later. The church called a former student of student pastor at Emmanuel, Higginbotham. And Higginbotham had, out of seminary, gone to Baltimore and was had one church in Baltimore, I think for 22 or 23 years. And then accepted a call to come back to Emmanuel. He lasted 6 months, and the church in Baltimore called him back, and he left and went back to Baltimore to that church. So with Dick's leaving, and with Higginbotham's abortive tenure at the church was kind of in turmoil. And so this a significant grouping within the church, composed primarily of younger families, came together and said, we needed to bring a young pastor in that is going to lead this church back into its missional purpose of serving. And so this group was instrumental in calling Jim Henry. I don't know if many of you know the story of Jim Henry, but Jim Henry was here for 2 years. And did you know Phyllis Henry at all?
Yeah, slightly.
Okay. Well, Phyllis Henry was married to Jim. At any rate, a situation where Jim got into a situation where he had to resign. And it was really a sad story. He had to resign. He and Phyllis divorced, and their daughter died all together.
Oh.
It was just a tragic situation. Phyllis went on to become a representative of MMBB. A field officer. I think it was
That's our retirement.
Pardon? Yeah.
I just want to explain that MMBB was M&M at the time, I think. Ministers' Benefit Board. It's our pension board.
Right.
For those who don't know.
Right. And she served the Northeast. But at any rate, when Jim left, this group that had brought him decided that they were going to move out and form a house church. And so you had Jim Ashbrook was one of the leaders, Evans was a part of that. Vance, who is a psychologist and also an adjunct faculty at Colgate Rochester, was another. You had Bob and Penny Peterson from Lake Avenue, who were a part of that. You had Tom Kroon. Probably most of you don't know who he is, but he was a seminarian that was very active and engaged. But you had a whole group that formed this house church. Carol Holtz was another member of not from Emmanuel, but another member of this house church that met. Really dynamic group. Their feeling was that the focus should not be on the church building and the maintenance of a facility. The focus needed to be on mission. And so resources should be directed toward mission and not to bricks and mortar. So that group moved out. So now we have a smaller remnant at the church. And I was on the search committee when, after Jim left, and Win Hudson was chaired that committee. And Win said that, he advised us not to take a long time deliberating, but to bring somebody in immediately, somebody young. And he said as a student of his was the perfect fit for the church, Ed Carey. So Ed was behind me by a couple of years in the seminary. So Ed came, was called as pastor of the church. And soon on the heels of that, because we had been running a program out of the corner house called the Park Avenue Project, which was really a community-based project, Ed convinced Nick and Debbie Carter to come and direct that project. And they were just graduating from the seminary. So Nick Carter came and ran the project for the first 3 years. Nick and then left, and then Larry Lefebvre came in, who was also a recent graduate of Colgate Rochester, to take over the project. And it was while Larry was there that the Park Avenue Festival began, was created, and there was quite a story about that festival and the growth of that festival. But at any rate, Nick Carter eventually went on to become president of Andover Newton, of course. We had some really talented people involved in the life of Emmanuel as we were going through this whole period of time. And after Ed Carey was called, Nick left, Ed Carey was called to the church that Bob Newell had in Cleveland when Bob Newell came to the Baptist Temple. And so we were, at that point, trying to make a decision, what was the future of Emmanuel? Did Emmanuel have a future? And this was back in 1975, 76. Well, at that time, they decided to call actually, he was an interim. It's interesting. He was an interim pastor, Paul Gleason. Paul had a history in Rochester of serving for 2-year terms at different churches. He served the Church of the Master, he served Parcells, he served another church at some point. And, but he came to Emmanuel, and we assumed that he would give us an opportunity to make a decision whether or not to continue as a church. Well, Paul stayed on for 17 years. And until he retired in 1993, I think it was, 93 or 94. And he came as a part-time pastor. So during this whole period of time, the church was not engaged in a whole lot beyond its Sunday service program. So, but we maintained a steady Sunday attendance of in the neighborhood of 50 or 60 people. And we were able to keep some basic programs going, but the Park Avenue Project run its day, and so that ceased to exist. So there wasn't a lot happening in the church. And we are at 5 o'clock, but so I don't know how much longer. Just pull the plug when you need to. But from the time of Paul leaving, we went through a period of time. There was a short period of time before the next pastor was called, who was Lee Barnhart. And Lee began, I think, in end of 1994. And without going into a lot of detail, Lee was asked to resign from the church in 1968. And it was in 1968 that the church was at a point where it was trying to decide whether or not to close, to sell the building and just close shop again. And it was at that point in time that Dick enters. And he can probably tell the story from this point forward better than, as well, if not better than I can. But Dick came to give us an opportunity to decide what God had in mind for the Emmanuel Baptist community. And one of the first things Dick said when he came was, look, we've got to pray. We've got to seek the guidance of the Holy Spirit. And frankly, the church had lost touch with the Holy Spirit. And so now it needed to just see what God was saying about who we were as a community. And out of that, we were able to begin to see a future for the church. And the church, of course, was not sold by one vote. Doris always said it was her vote. I always said it was my vote. But at any rate, and then, so Dick came and really helped the church through these years of finding what the spirit of this church was. What were the angels? I think that was one of the primary areas that you were focusing on, Dick. What were the angels of this church? And we identified.
I have to say,
pardon?
that we had a church retreat,
Yeah.
and we had talked about what is the angel of Emmanuel.
Right.
And somebody pointed out that in the book of Revelation, it talks about the 7 churches. And the letters, we always think of them as letters to the churches, but if you look at it carefully, it's letters to the angels of the churches.
Sure.
And
Right.
so the notion is that every church has its own spirit, and we have to find out what the spirit of Emmanuel is, and just get back in sync with it. And we kind of agreed that it's the spirit of healing, because of the big healing window in the front, and the spirit of music. People are talking about that. And so we did the retreat based on that. And Gene Parker, who worked in the office for quite a while, indefatigably, and who wrote a grant for $30,000, $35,000, I think, in order for us to raise $250,000 to fix the place up. Gene is the one who came up with that theme, what is the angel of Emmanuel? And I think that became a really important theme, and it's one that has life to it, something that you can return to all the time. And I think we're finding the angel of Emmanuel, and it's a very exciting journey that we're on.
Well, just look at the angel of healing. We had a church that was disenfranchised, that was excommunicated. Spiritus Corpus Christi, that became Spiritus Christi, that found a home at Emmanuel, a place to heal. We had area artists who came to Emmanuel needing a place where they could heal. We have people that have walked through the doors who have been touched by this spirit of the sense of healing, that whose hearts have been deeply touched. And I think that in the music is part of healing. It's it's a voice that touches the soul, the heart. And so I think music and healing certainly go hand in hand. And that really has been at the heart of who we have been now for the last 20 years. Certainly, it was a part of the ministry of Rachel, and it's a part of your ministry, Wendy. You know, so there's something there that reverberates, that resonates in the life of this community. And
I
people
like that, Paul, very much. And I think that it's true that all of us have felt healing in this community, not just those who came under our ministry, but we ourselves have experienced healing by being there. Hey, Michael?
Can somebody refresh me on the stained glass over in the altar?
Well, yeah,
So-
at one point, the chapel of the church was used as the chapel for the hospital. The Park Avenue Hospital is right across the street. There were the families of two doctors at the hospital that were so appreciative of the church allowing its facility to be used in that way that they donated that stained glass window. And it is a window of healing. The panels, at some point we need to go through what all those panels mean. We periodically have done that, but it's the stained glass window is just full of symbolic ways that healing takes place. So, and then in the back, as you exit, there is the window of learning. So we have healing in the front of the chapel, and we have education or learning in the back. So the sanctuary comes between the two. So as we heal, we learn, but as we go out to serve, we carry both of those with us in our engagement with those outside. So there's a lot of symbolism in the way the sanctuary is put together. You know, at some point, maybe we need to remind people of what the significance of those windows are, and how those windows, just by the colors that were used, are very restful, at least for me. And you know, the whole sanctuary is just radiated by the colors in those windows.
Thank you.
Well, I hope you have a chance to read, because I left out a lot of stuff that I had pulled together, but I hope you have a chance to. Michael, did you get the attachment?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So please read it. But well,
Thank you, Paul, for all the good work on it.
Yeah. I hope it's been helpful.
Yes.
Very much.
Great.
Very much.
We have a wonderful history, and you know so much of it.
Yeah.
Well, you know, you live long enough, and you do see a lot of it. But
if you're third or fourth generation Vick, you know, we went way back to the beginning, Clarence Vick, way back when.
Well, that's right. You know, and they were part of the Park Avenue community, part of the East Avenue community, and then onto the Emmanuel Baptist community. But our life was totally revolving around the church in the region. And then on the national level, we would go to conventions. But that was about our only connection on the national. But the Association of Churches, and my grandfather was clerk of the Ordination Council for about 35 years in the region.
And
So
Paul,
yeah.
can you just remind me, my grandfather, Albert DeMott, died the year that I was born. So I don't really have an extensive knowledge of him, but my memory is you said that the house he lived in is now the parking lot for the church. Right?
Yeah, the old parsonage is the parking lot for the church.
Okay.
Um,
And grandfather was the pastor at that time then?
no, he was the executive minister of our Association of Churches at that time.
Well, then would he be living in that house that belonged to Emmanuel?
He was in the office or in the house. Yeah, because in 1949 we bought the corner house, and that became the parsonage of the church. So that opened up this house, the old parsonage house, and
For the denominational offices or the
Yeah.
region office?
I don't know if the denominational offices were there.
I
Were
should say the region.
But that's where he lived. That's where the executive lived. Is that right?
Yeah. That's
Oh.
where the executive lived.
Oh.
Paul, this is Diane Phillips.
Yes.
Hi, Diane.
Did you know of my father, Roy Fries? Because he was very active during the fight period, and he was with Saul Alinsky when Saul came to town. He was also known as the Rat Man of Rochester.
Was he connected with the church community?
Loosely with Incarnate Word Lutheran.
Okay. All right.
I think Richard and Beth know of him.
Yeah,
We were,
after I was in college from 63 to 67 out in Kalamazoo. So my connection during that period of time was primarily during the summer of 64, because Kalamazoo was on a year-round basis, and I was also there in the spring to do I worked at Hillside Children's Center during the career quarter in 65. But other than that, I was out of town, so I wasn't involved in a lot of the follow-up.
Okay, he helped instigate the instant housing program in
Okay.
Rochester.
Okay.
You've heard of that, right?
The instant housing.
Yeah.
Well, there wasn't a housing project that was built, was it?
It wasn't a project. It was mobile homes that they would put onto a cellar. It was an affordable way to get people out of the tenements.
Okay.
Hmm.
All right. I don't have recollection of that, but
Okay, nobody else does either.
Nope, but it's recorded now forever and ever, and will be
Oh,
channel.
my father will be pleased.
Part of our living history.
it is.
Okay. Yeah, he used to, he was on the radio shows a lot. And if people in the inner city, if moms had rats in their apartments, they would call my father, and he would go 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. And he used to drive around City Hall with a paper mache rat attached to the family station wagon.
Wow.
And he would distribute free rat poison in the inner city.
wow.
Wow.
And guess what car I got to drive to college?
Was the rat still stuck to it?
The rat stayed on there.
Oh, gee.
Diane,
Yeah.
Sorry. I appreciate, Diane, you sharing that. That brought further deepens an understanding of that period of time, which was an amazing period of time in Rochester. And
Paul, can you also just send me the link to your life story YouTube? I went looking for it the other day and couldn't find it, but I'd like to connect it to our YouTube channel. So the documentary that was made of your life story.
oh, of my parents?
Yes, your parents and you.
Okay. Yes, yes.
I think, Michael, if you've not seen that yet, you're going to want to watch that. It's really powerful. Carol, you probably
Oh, then I'm gonna check it out.
Right, I
Paul's trip
haven't
to
seen it
China,
either.
haven't
Wendy,
seen it,
is that what
Diane.
you're talking about?
I'm sorry, Dick and Beth, your sound is in and out. So what were you saying?
Was it Paul's trip to China about 5
Yeah.
years ago, looking at his parents?
Yeah,
and-
the one that we
that's
watched together. It's really
Mm.
powerful, and I couldn't find it on YouTube, but I'm sure you have the link.
Well, I can send it to you.
Yes, please do.
Yeah.
Because once you send it to me, I can connect it to our YouTube channel.
Okay.
Great.
Now, if you go on the International Ministries, it's on their YouTube channel too.
Oh, okay.
But let me send you the one.
All right, good. Thank you.
Okay.
So on the ministry piece, Wendy, we talked a little bit about that the other day. So
Go ahead.
I just want to share with the community because the dinner bell rang and I have to go, it's required. But Diane, we did receive your donation here at the house, and Diane has made a donation to the Hirsch House, and we are going to start a sponsorship of one of Ray's, I want to say, I don't know why I keep saying Donovan, one of Ray's,
Bellinger.
yes, one of his ministries.
Yeah.
So I'm going to have
Oh.
the men watch it. We're going to do a small little celebration in honor Diane, and then we're going to actually put the monies towards that ministry, and we're going to make it kind of a East House alumnus Manual Baptist sponsorship of a ministry.
Wonderful.
That's
love that.
brilliant.
So
Yeah.
we
That's
are doing
wonderful.
that. Thank you,
Thank
Diane.
you,
Your
Michael.
check came
Thank you, Diane.
today, and I gave it to the staff. So the work is
Well,
going forward.
Michael surprised me with this.
These ways of indicating. I just
All
learned.
right.
And
Well,
I
Michael, go
apologize
to
for
dinner.
being late, but I got the privilege and honor of working in Carrie's garden. But you have to be trained to work
Oh,
in
yeah.
that
Oh,
garden.
wow.
Yeah, you do.
So I couldn't leave. I was like, I had to get my lessons. So now I'm a volunteer in the garden. Jan and I are going to be a team
Oh,
together.
that's wonderful, Michael.
Yeah.
Wow, that's perfect.
That's fantastic.
So
Michael,
Good for you.
can you give me a phone call? Do you have my phone number?
I have your number. It was in the letter. I will call you after I go
What-
down and have some supper.
Of
And
course,
Paul,
take your
thank you
time.
very much. I apologize for being late again, but I did
No
catch it.
problem. Well, thank you, Paul.
Yes,
Bye.
thanks,
Thank
Paul.
you all.
Right.
Right.
See you all. Have a good weekend.
Right.
You too.
See you Sunday at the meeting.
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah,